This building was one of just three that survived the 40-block demolition of the St. Louis riverfront, but it slowly vanished over time anyway. The old rock house was built in 1818 as a fur trading warehouse, which was St. Louis's first major industry. Late 1820s, the building was purchased by Mark Twain's cousin James Clemens, and part of his ownership consisted of a business making wagon covers for people heading out west. It was said to be the only building on the riverfront not touched by the flames of the Great Fire of 1849, and over the years it held many uses, including as a tavern and as a boatman service for people on the river. In the 1930s, there was a very controversial movement to demolish most of the St. Louis riverfront. Proponents of this idea felt that replacing this industrial area with a westward expansion memorial would offer a fresh look for the city. But as you can see in this photo, we lost so much architecture in the process. As we all know, the project did move forward, and across this massive area, only 3 buildings were set to be spared, and that was the old cathedral, the old courthouse, and the old rock house. These 3 buildings were saved due to the representation of St. Louis's history and culture, with the old rock house specifically being the oldest building on the riverfront at this time, as well as being a fur trading warehouse, which again was St. Louis's first industry. After surviving the mass demolition in the early 1940s, a WPA program sought to restore the old rock house, but after all the renovations, only 10% of the original building remained. When the design competition for the new memorial was held, it was stipulated that the old rock house must be integrated into the plan, but the train tracks you see here soon became a huge problem. The funders of the project felt that the train tracks by the old rock house looked unsightly, and architect Eero Saarinen tried to compromise, but ultimately they could not find a plan that worked for both sides, which meant the rock house had to be disassembled and moved. Much like the first renovation, the disassembly was also botched. The walls became disintegrated during the process, but they still numbered every limestone block for safekeeping and reassembly eventually. But unfortunately, they chose to store it outside the old cathedral, and naturally, sadly, this led to people stealing pieces of the blocks. So between the theft, the original renovation, and the botched disassembly, very little of the original building remained. The remaining brick, stone, and wood from the old rock house sat in the basement of the old courthouse for decades. Many park rangers didn't even know where the materials came from, but thankfully there is somewhat of a happy ending here. In 2018, the old rock house materials were taken from storage and put back together in the newly renovated Gateway Arch Museum, and so in a weird poetic way, the building that replaced the old rock house is now the one that protects it. This picture is a really good reference for where the old rock house was. It's roughly where one of the arch legs is today, and you can just see here how much the riverfront has changed in the last 100 years. I could talk about the topic of the riverfront for hours because on one hand, I love the arch. I love how it represents St. Louis. On the other hand, we lost so much historic architecture. This vote was very controversial. It was done in haste. And I also don't think a 40-block demolition is necessary, even if you did want a memorial. There could have been some in between, but that goes to show historic preservation is still a relatively new concept, and it has to be done with care. And the answer is not